The following program, Such is Life, the Ben Cousins story, is an open look at the effect illegal drug use has had on the life of Ben Cousins. The program includes images and discussion of a strength and intensity, which Channel 7 believes warrants additional parental discretion if being viewed by very young viewers.
The following program, Such is Life, the troubled times of Ben Cousins, is classified and it contains drug use and some coarse language. Channel 7 recommends viewing by mature audiences.
Hi, I'm Ben Cousins. What you're about to watch is a documentary we started making in early 2008. At that stage, I didn't know where it would lead, but I thought it was important to have a record of the things that were happening to me. I understand that some of the footage you see in this film is very troubling, and it doesn't always depict me in the best light. It's often very raw and confronting. But I feel there are some real lessons to be learned here, and I genuinely believe some good can come from it, for everyone. I hope this documentary can send a powerful message to young people, for that matter all people, about the way drugs affect your life. If it helps save one person's life, or helps us better understand addiction, then it will have served its real purpose. How did I get here? I'm in a Richmond football jumper, playing against my old team, against my mates, in a city where I grew up. There's two sides to this story. One was played out in public, in newspapers, on television and talkback radio. The other was played out in private. But along the way, it caused a lot of damage to my family and my friends, and the football club too. But this is not just a football story. It's a story about drug addiction, chronic relapses, rehabilitation, and my recovery.
He was the Prince of Perth. He was the biggest name in the state.
Cousins, superb stuff from the champ.
I expect you to, live like a priest all week and fight like the devil on the weekend.
Ben Cousins marks.
Whether you like it or not, this bloke's been seen with people that are criminals.
I was a heavy drug taker, but I was also a highly functional drug addict.
To Cousins, that is dangerous when Cousins has space.
He certainly was using large quantities of those substances.
I think of drug addict, I think of people sleeping in a cardboard box under a fucking bridge. So not true.
Here's a bit of artwork, Ox.
What about that? Such is life.
And here's a bloke who hasn't tested positive once. Absolutely killing our image. And when you kill the AFL image, they kill you.
He's been running all year, and he's finishing strong. Dangerous hands, dangerous boots.
State league games, you'll be part of the action. You get to listen to the coaches at three-quarter time. And you could even win a brand new footy. But the best part is, you get to play around a little.
Ben, the gorgeous little boy, a very bull at a gate. Everything would go 100%. And back when he was a little boy, Brian was playing footy then.
Footy is very much a family game, and he always was, wanted to go to the footy every time I was going. They were almost like one of the footy players. They'd be sitting in the locker room talking to the players, kicking the footy and just having a good time, yeah.
I look back now and realise probably what a nuisance I was to the players. Always had a footy in my hand, and I think, probably developed a love of the game and formed, the intention of wanting to play at an elite level at a really young age, watching my dad play.
His enthusiasm for sport basically overruled you know, everything else, like nothing would stand in the way from him. And that's training as well as playing. He just loved to be involved, yeah. He couldn't ever get enough of it.
He had very good breeding, obviously, with his father being a champion player. It seemed Ben was destined for a successful career as an athlete, even at that early time.
His success, I think, that he had in footy was attributable to his dedication as opposed to his natural ability.
I went down a couple of times and watched him play at the school level. Now, he wasn't the chiselled-out body that we see running around. He was a little half-forward flanker that had all the ability. Ball came to him, he just destroyed his opponent.
He was just 100% towards, you know, achieving his goal, and that's all he wanted to do was to play AFL. I think Ben has an addictive sort of nature. So whatever he puts his hand to, he will go to, leave no stone unturned. Ben was a very good student academically. He was a straight A student, in the end.
During my childhood, I was always knocking around with the blokes that were up to a bit of mischief. And even through my high school years, the guys that I was knocking around with were the guys that were playing up, experimenting with a bit of drugs. Somebody to ask me the question about when did things get out of control for me. I started using recreational illicit drugs when I was 17 or 18. I was taking drugs regularly and hard. I may have been predisposed to this well before I even picked up a drug, and from that very first time, it just opened up a gateway for me that very quickly, if not instantly, became an obsession. I was under no illusions that I was a heavy drug taker, but I was also a highly functional drug addict. My drug use in some respects was in control, but the level of it was out of control.
Amphetamines, generally, ice.
Ecstasy, cocaine.
Cocaine.
Methamphetamines.
I'm pretty sure it was mainly ice.
Well, I only know what Ben told me he was taking, and that is cocaine and very irregularly ice.
There would be a time and a place for speed. There'd be a time and a place for ecstasy. Cocaine was my drug of choice, no question, but Valium played a huge part in that. Xanax played a huge part in that.
Drug use, drug addiction, is a disease. Ben's probably factor was he thought he was bulletproof. He always thought he could handle it. And he found out to his detriment that he couldn't.
There's no doubt that I am obsessive compulsive to the way I train. It's bordering on unhealthy at times. I needed to balance that out with something, and very early on, it became drugs.
Certainly, I think he saw drug use generally as a bit of a reward for the hard work that he put into his sporting prowess, if you like.
I am an extremist. I do have the ability to hyper-focus on something. The unique thing about my situation was that I was applying that same obsession to football as I was to drugs. I just kept on intensifying it, and I kept on training even harder. The longer I did it, the better footy I played, the more it reinforced to me that I had a method that was working.
Saw him knocking around in the gym, and you could see this small little kid, but he had this look, and he always just had this buzz, this appearance about him.
Here's Cousins, 30 metres out, the first game on! Yes!
I saw him play his first intra-club practice match, and he kicked a sensational goal in the first 5 minutes of the practice match. You just knew that as soon as they chose to play him, he was going to play well.
In 1996, I played my first game for West Coast as a 17-year-old.
Never before has there been a West Australian junior footballer with a brighter future than Ben Cousins, the son of a champion and a sponsor's dream.
He was a great player who can win the football at ground level, still maintain it, still hold his balance, and then deliver it. And it's a rarity, a real rarity. And you see that with the champions.
In my first year, won the Norwich Rising Star Award, which was for the best first-year player. It was at the tail end of a really successful era at the footy club where I was fortunate to play with some really good players, and it was all happening pretty quickly for me. I was getting a lot of notoriety off-field and playing some pretty good footy.
He was the only bloke that literally saw throw up and keep running, and throw up and keep running, and he looked like he was going to die. But he had a look in his eyes saying, he's going to continue to do this.
I think he's one of the greatest workers I've ever seen in the AFL, and I think that's the double whammy. That's why we got the player we got. We ended up with a super midfielder, a generational talent, as much due to the hard work he put in as to the ability he got from his mum and dad.
In retrospect, say this kid was always destined to be a great player. He certainly came in, he was exciting, he was the best junior of his year in the competition, and then he just got better and better. And his contribution to West Coast, particularly when they sort of started going downhill.
They were down the arse end of a ladder, and he really was the definition of a one-man team there for a while.
He came home one night and said that the Eagles had spoken to him about becoming captain, and it sort of shocked me a bit, but I was concerned that I could see him being built up, and I could just see his attitude, you know, to life changing, where he basically thought, you know, he was bulletproof. I actually went to the trouble of ringing up the CEO of the Eagles and having a meeting with him and expressed my concern. I made it quite clear that I didn't think the club should appoint him captain.
At 22, I was the sole captain at West Coast, and it was just young.
He presented well, loved his training, loved everything about preparing to play footy.
Now, I wouldn't have butter on my toast, let alone fucking have a beer or take drugs. And I would train and obsess and play good footy. And the thing that would get me through those tough moments, those tough days, times when I wanted to get on, was I knew at the end of that 1 week block, 2 week block, or even sometimes as long as a month, I was going to absolutely annihilate and launch into as much drugs as I could.
Some story, isn't it? Ben Cousins, the exceptional footballer and self-confessed drug addict. Tomorrow night, after part 2 of Such Is Life, we'll have Ben's father and best mate Brian here in the studio. And you can send in your comment or ask Brian via the email or Twitter addresses on your screen anything you like about his experiences with his son Ben. So join us tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. for part 2 of Such Is Life.
I was going to absolutely annihilate and launch into as much drugs as I could. I used to think about drugs on the way to a training session. During a training session, I often thought about it before games. Going to a game, I'd go, today is war. And I will leave nothing left on that pitch, because by doing that, I allow myself the ultimate reward.
The winner of the 2005 Brownlow Medal is Ben Cousins, the West Coast
He was the Prince of Perth. He was the biggest name in the state, but you've got to have some boundaries, and I don't think Ben ever had any boundaries.
I think one of the great problems that everyone associated with Ben made, that, you know, the measuring stick of how Ben was going in his life was how well he was playing footy.
You know, we all used to go out a lot, you know, and we're doing it each week. And I guess with him it was so hard because he would go harder than anyone else. And then by the time, you know, the week got out and it was time for the next weekend or the next game, and then you'd see him perform, it clouded your judgment because he was still being so successful and stuff on the field.
You know, as a 17, 18-year-old, it's nightclubs, it's girls, it's success. But it was like a dream come true. It all happened so quickly, far exceeding my own expectations. It was fast and it was good. As young guys, we were very brazen. We had a sense of invincibility. You know, I would have been loving it. Yeah, they were good times. Alcohol wasn't a big thing for me at the time. It was all about the drugs for me.
Well, I guess when his night started to revolve around taking drugs, then, you know, it was just something that happened when you were out. It became a real focus of the night. It was you know, you locked in his certain mates that he knew was going to do it with him. Like it became a whole sort of ritual every week.
I should have known, the problem. And I think most parents end up with a family member that's, ends up with addiction. By the time the parent finds out, you're in real strife.
We've heard since 2002, 2003 that there were maybe drug issues at the club.
We started hearing things that were going on at West Coast and hearing things that maybe suggested that all was not well.
Stories about players seen at nightclubs snorting coke or, dropping tablets or, being seen with interesting and colourful characters in the West Australian club scene.
It reached a point of critical mass in early 2005 when there was a very violent incident at a nightclub. One gang member was shot, another gang member was stabbed.
More than 1,000 people are partying below them in a basement corridor. Coffin cheater confronts, joins in. Seconds later, is pushing away. But the bikie soon follows, reaching for a gun.
Ben Cousins and Michael Gardner were questioned over phone calls with people allegedly involved in the attack.
As captain of the West Coast Eagles Football Club, I am extremely disappointed with the public perception of my continued association with people who are regarded by others as underworld figures.
It certainly hurts our brand. We don't like it. We'd like our players to be squeaky clean, but unfortunately, not all of them are. And in this case, Ben's got himself into another investigation.
How are you, buddy? Good as a fiddle. Hello, mate. How's things, buddy?
When he was hanging around people like John Kizon and those sort of people, no one would sort of harass him. So I think he sort of had that, it was a bit of protection almost for him. He could sort of be himself.
As you can see, there's another picture on my wall. Three handsome guys, myself, Fabian Quaid in the middle, who I met Ben through, and Troy McCanty, who...
Whether you like it or not, John Kizon has been in a lot of trouble over the years. If you're half smart, you don't hang out with them.
Did you see the Pacquiao Marquez fight the other week? No. Great fight. No, I'm not going to stop hanging around my mates. Because I lose my identity then.
You missed my point.
Yeah.
My point was... it's not about hanging around with the mates, it's the behaviour hanging around with mates.
Yeah, but it wasn't those blokes that were the ones that led me down the garden path. I've never sat around and done lines of coke with John Kizon.
He didn't believe he was doing anything wrong. He certainly wasn't being involved in criminal activity with them, although the media was suggesting so.
Some of these guys had said they wanted to meet with him. He said they just sat me down and said that they'd become aware of the extent of his, usage of drugs, and they were very concerned, and they sort of told him that it had to, he had to change his ways.
When I heard he was on the wrong road, we actually approached him, went and seen him and said, listen, the rumours are you're on a destruction course. If you don't stop, it's going to be your downfall.
There are always going to be adverse perceptions and adverse media as a result of any continued association by Ben with these characters.
When I found myself in trouble with either the football club or the law, I used that to motivate myself for the next 6 months to play well, because the scrutiny was on me. It was so important that I stood up, in times of hardship, and I'm a proud person, and I fought my way out by turning the screws up on the training, by preparing well, by backing myself in, and in some crazy way, the intensity of all that appealed to me. It was almost like the ultimate challenge, and as each problem arose and each dilemma that I found myself in, the scrutiny was amplified. The intensity of the way I needed to train and get myself out of was just amplified. It was just, everything was just getting bigger, and I think I was addicted to that.
Welcome to the AFL Grand Final 2005 between the Sydney Swans and the West Coast Eagles. Cousins has got it. The captain, the Brownlow medalist. Can someone mark it? Oh,
You play your whole life to get into a grand final, and we got knocked off by less than a kick. And you know that you're not guaranteed to get there the year after. So it was just gut-wrenching. It took me a while to dust myself off from that one. After the 2005 grand final, I hit the headlines again over the summer. It was probably the beginning of my fall from grace, where I'd been at a family wedding and went on.
Brownlow medalist Ben Cousins could be stripped of the Eagles' captaincy after an incident involving a booze bus. He's been interviewed by police after allegedly abandoning his car in traffic to avoid a breath test.
Oh, no, I don't really need to say it at the moment, guys.
When police approached the car, two men jumped out and ran off down a side street. Officers chased the pair.
I think that the booze bus incident, I wish it hadn't have happened, because it caused a few headaches.
He was the person driving the car, and I think it's now for you to ask Mr Cousins why on earth he would run away from a booze bus.
Getting caught by a booze bus is career-threatening. I just had to take off. And when I took off, I took off. I wasn't messing around. I couldn't tell you how many houses I jumped through. I was over back fences, I was on top of roofs, and I took off across the river. And I reckon I got really close to being halfway over. The river would have been a K across, it was a long swim. I'd spent, 10 or 12 hours on the drink and what have you, and I started to get pretty tired. I was tired, and I thought as important as it is that I get away, it's probably not quite as important as not going under. I make it back to the side that I've come, and I wade sort of in waist-deep water all the way along the river, probably 800 metres to the restaurant. I bang on the door. So the chef come out and he opened the door and let me make a phone call, but he was a bit inquisitive. He says, "You're not Ben Cousins, are you?" I said, "No, don't be stupid, mate. Bloke's no good."
Running away from his footy club, from his responsibilities, from the police, from the drug testers, from the booze bus, leaving his then girlfriend to carry the can. He was a bit of a runner.
I thought the Eagles had a real chance to win a flag, and I could see a lot of careers going down the tube because a selfish captain wanted to play the game his own way.
It was like a bell went off in your head. I just said to my sports editor, he can't be captain anymore. He's the on-field leader of this massive club with about 800,000 supporters in Western Australia. And then, as happens in newspapers, once you've said it, you're expected to write it. And I got a death threat smeared in blood from some bloke who claimed to be the chairman of the Ben Cousins fan club.
We're not going to make moves due to public, media or supporters' pressure.
The grim faces told the story as Ben Cousins accepted the inevitable.
I've decided to stand down as captain of the West Coast Eagles Football Club. I understand that through a few errors of judgment, I've put enormous pressure and scrutiny on the footy club. I do regret having to resign under these circumstances, but I do believe it's the best course of action for the footy club. I was sacked in 2006, or resigned, if you like, in 2006. But as disappointed as I was just hell-bent on the side not losing any of its momentum and chances of winning a premiership.
Leading up to the 2006 premiership was a pretty difficult time because that's when cracks started to appear with the way Ben was going about his football. Some of the attributes that made Ben a strong leader were starting to work against him because the players didn't believe he was then setting the right example for them and weren't going to follow him or look up to him as much as they had in the past.
I stood up amongst the playing group and vowed to, stay strong and not put a foot wrong for the remainder of the season.
We are blessed with a perfect day at the MCG for the 2006 Grand Finals. As McVeigh and Cousins get into it before the opening bounce, we're away in the Grand Final of 2006. On the next line, Hunter across to Cousins. He's been running all year and he's finishing strongly. The West Coast Eagles lead by a point. Can the Swans do it?
Everything I'd done in my career was about getting to that moment. Everything. And it was about the euphoria of us as a side winning it. And I thought I was entitled to let my hair down after we won one.
Is the 2006 Premiership tainted? Well, Robert Walls and I discussed this on the couch, and Wallsy was strong in the view that the Premiership win had been tainted by the behaviour of the footballers and by the obvious use of drugs.
Whether or not it's tainted, I think there's always going to be question marks about what was going on with Ben, and we've probably understand maybe one or two other players.
Number 9, Ben Cousins. What a year he's had, Malcolm.
I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs. You know, I've never taken drugs game day, the day before. I've never taken drugs immediately before a game, during a game. It goes against everything that I believe in as a sportsman. After the 06 Premiership win, I'm taking real safety measures about staying out of the headlines and really grappling with, at that stage, my addiction.
Ben Cousins was again put on notice after another embarrassing encounter with police, arrested for being drunk in a public place.
Well, I don't think I'd had any sleep for 6 nights. I'd been on a lot of cocaine, a lot of ice. I remember standing in front of the coppers and they asked me my name, and I said my name, it's Ben Cousins, and there's a female copper amongst them, and she said, Ben Cousins doesn't look like that. And I remember ripping my shirt off. I said, well, he did a week ago. I'm a drug addict, just flat out. And, you know, and even then, still not realising what I really am, and still not aware of what I'm grappling with and why I am the way I am.
You know, it was really leading into that 2007 season, the pre-season, where you could just see that the players then were frustrated with Ben even being around.
He'd gone from being the most dedicated, player at the West Coast Eagles to one that they were starting to have issues with.
He didn't enjoy training. Everything was getting in the way. Everything was hard work for him, to the point where he actually accused players of training too hard to make him look bad.
It was in control, but it was out of control. It was out of control. My drug use in some respects was in control, but the level of it was out of control. I think day 2 is better than day 1, and day 3 is better than day 2. Day 4 is better than day 3. Day 5 is better than day 4. And they go, well, mate, you got to go home and have a rest. I said, well, I spent 10 grand and 5 days of hard work getting to where I am now. I'm not going to go home and throw it all down the drain. You know, it was just that silly sort of half humour, half just madness, you know.
He may have had a tendency to look at his behaviour and think, well, I'm not hurting anybody else. I've got the money to go and do that, or I can do this, or, you know, and he may very well, on some levels, have thought his behaviour hasn't impacted greatly on others. People that don't use drugs feel the strain of the person using drugs because they are watching them on a daily basis. They know what's going on, you know, and they can see that this boy's changing before my eyes, you know, like, what is going on here?
Addiction is really a chronic, relapsing disease of the brain. And I often use, when I'm talking to people, an expression, it's like a runaway car where the accelerator's stuck and the brake's not working. And most of us wouldn't want to drive that sort of car, but that's what's happening in the brain of an addict.
It almost sort of creates a pattern of use in the brain that when the substance comes in, so when you get that trigger, those patterns are actually triggered each time.
It can't be cured, not in our current understanding, just the same as asthma, diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis are not curable diseases, but they're all controllable diseases. And certainly addictions can be controlled just as well.
I'm close with my parents and my family, and you know, my awareness of what was going on around me, or the effect it was having, was, you know, my judgment was out.
And we had one terrible Christmas day when Ben was very, very clearly affected.
He asked me to pull over because he said he couldn't go into the Christmas thing without using before because of the state that he was in. And I mean, that brought me to tears because I just knew that he was, going to walk in. I had my grandparents there and he looked terrible, but he just looked so scared. And I think that's when it really hit home to Mum, because I can remember Mum just, she was brought to tears. He becomes quite scattery, his whole body jumps, he twitches, and it's just, it's frightening to see someone not being able to control themselves.
At this stage I was just drinking and taking some pharmaceuticals like Valium or Xanax after a game to unwind, and it's a pretty dangerous combination, that. Probably a lot more dangerous than, than the recreational drugs themselves, because you find yourself in a state where you're doing things without knowing you're doing them, and then before you know it, I was back in the middle of taking recreational drugs.
This may be the end of the line for Ben Cousins. He was a no-show at yesterday's training session, where drug testers were waiting. No one, not even team officials, could find him. That left the Eagles hierarchy no choice.
It's time that Ben is suspended from the club to go away and try and tackle these personal and private issues head on.
When Ben got suspended by the West Coast Eagles, he went on a massive bender for about 6 days. The only 2 people he'd speak to were Maney and me.
We knew he was on this bender. I then tried to coerce him over here, knowing that if I could get him here, I can just try and, lock him up here or do whatever it took.
Sorry, my phone rang and I saw it was Ben's number, and I said, yeah, mate, what do you want? And it wasn't Ben, it was one of his mates, and he said, Ben's asked if you'd come and pick him up. And I said, he's not too flashy. He said, no, he's not at all. And he told me where he was, and it was 3 in the morning. But when I got there, Maney was waiting outside. We went in. Ben at that stage had used again, so he was all pumped up, and it took us about 3 hours to get him out.
I was just on a bender, thought I was having the time of my life. I had no awareness of really what was going on, and then I remember sitting down, just having a moment where I thought, being suspended here, my livelihood's been taken away. Round 1's in 9-10 days, I'm not there.
Ben was in my kitchen and I was hand-feeding him Nutrigrade. He was collapsing, sort of thing.
So I was terrified because, I'll be quite frank, I thought, he could kill himself. It was, my objective at that stage, was to, quite frankly, I knew I was trying to save his life.
We had the opportunity to use a house in Mandurah, and we just thought we need to get him straight before we get him to rehab, but that was the end result, was going to be rehab.
It's funny because it was probably the most harrowing or tough times for the people around me, but because of the state that I was in, I wasn't feeling a lot of what was going on. I was numb. That week took a fair bit out of me, and I guess established over that period that I did need to go to rehab, or was convinced that I needed to go to rehab to get back to playing footy. It was sort of explained to me in no uncertain terms by the footy club that I needed to be seen to be doing the right thing.
Decisions were made that Ben was going into rehab and where he would go.
Good evening. Disgraced West Coast Eagles star Ben Cousins is on his way to the United States to seek treatment for his drug addiction. The 2005 Brownlow medalist flew out last night and will spend up to 2 months in a private rehabilitation centre.
Yeah, I was drugged, folks. Yep. You're not going to go to rehab in any other state. And even then, I still thought that I was all right. And it wasn't until I got to rehab and got halfway through a month of intense treatment that I thought, hey, I need to be here. But before that, I thought, I'm going because I want to play footy. I'm going to keep my career and livelihood. And the problem with all this is that The terms that I agreed to go to rehab on had all changed by the time I got back because of the intense media scrutiny, the profile of this, and the amount of people that then felt obligated to have their say, whether it was people in the football industry, people in the media, people in politics. And very quickly my issue didn't become about me, it became about the broader issue of drugs in sport, of recreational drugs, of tolerating drugs, of zero tolerance, of do we rehabilitate or, how do we handle it?
I always thought it was ridiculous that he would go to LA for rehab. I mean, clearly there's a bit of a part of Ben Cousins that thinks he's a rock star.
I would have liked to have been able to say, well, why don't we just put him in our rehab here? But unfortunately, there are downsides of that too. When you're a celebrity and you're placed in that sort of environment, you're not going to get the same deal as every other drug user that's going into that treatment centre. And that's the problem with it, the anonymity isn't going to happen. He wouldn't have been on an equal standing with other people in that treatment centre.
Exactly a month after he flew out of Australia, it was a seemingly happy, fit and healthy Ben Cousins who landed back in Perth this morning.
Ben, 28 days, is that enough to recover from your problem?
Hope so.
If and when he does play again, it will be under tough new contract conditions, including being banned from having contact with certain Perth identities, regular drug testing, publicly acknowledging he has a drug problem and apologising. Breaking those rules would result in instant dismissal.
I think when he came back from Summit, he certainly had a bit of an idea that, geez, maybe my drug use is actually causing enough problems in my life. But even then, I think, some of that was probably more of an intellectual understanding of it. And I think still in his mind, he still had that, I'll just see out this year, or I'll try and get through this year, and then, I'll do the best I can to not use in that period of time. But I really think he thought that he could manage it okay.
When he came back from LA after having undergone this whole period of rehabilitation, and the AFL and West Coast and the media are putting all this pressure on him to come out and apologise when he doesn't want to apologise because he doesn't believe he's done anything wrong, other than to himself, he has to be cajoled and not forced, but almost put on him that unless he does it, he's never going to have a chance of playing again.
As you're aware, I've been at an overseas rehabilitation centre for the past month undergoing treatment for a number of personal issues, including illness as a result of substance use. My treatment is an ongoing process and I have many challenges ahead of me that I need to overcome. Post-rehab, I trained super hard. I think it was the hardest month of running training that I've done in my life. So I mentioned it before about my psychology or the approach to sport is that if I'm doing the hard work, I can actually relax and feel confident that what will be will be. It was like that ultimate challenge.
Here it is. A standing ovation for Ben Cousins. They're coming off the bench, but after 15 weeks of absence, Ben is back. What about this man? The greats seem to produce as the moment demands.
Everyone is watching. It was a test. Would this break me? Would I be able to stand up? How would I handle the nerves? What would be going through my head?
Under pressure, holding the ball.
Everyone is watching. How do I perform?
She covers it. The Eagles win, but it's another classic. And Ben Cousins' comeback will be remembered as long as football is played.
Ben came back against the Sydney Swans, best on the ground and fantastic. It was huge story.
And did pretty well and played out the rest of the season. I think I managed 7 or 8 games, got to an elimination final in Adelaide against Port and did my hammy.
Here's a bit of artwork, Ox.
What about that? Ben's tat says such is life. Ned Kelly's last words. There you go.
And then he did his hamstring in Adelaide. I was there. When it happened, he was absolutely devastated. Turned out to be his last game.
Well, Cousins has done a hamstring, has he?
Yeah,
he's down.
He's gone, yeah. He's in serious trouble.
What have they done?
Left hamstring.
The
The concern there, the block of ice suddenly on fire.
What about the tattoo now, Dennis?
I did my hammy in that game. It was a bad one. And the next week we got kicked out of the finals. The season was over. And then, out of nowhere, my great mate died. It was a crazy time in my life. Everything had stopped making sense.
The Major Crime Squad is investigating the sudden death of former Eagles star Chris Mainwaring, and Cousins was one of the last people to see him alive.
It had been revealed that he'd been at Mainwaring's home only hours before the former Eagle was found unconscious, reportedly of a drug overdose.
The 2007 football season ended tragically with the death of Chris Mainwaring immediately after the grand final.
Police were called to Mainwaring's home in Beachside, Cottesloe, after reports that he was shouting in the street. Police said he was calm and refused medical treatment. An hour later, Mainwaring was found unconscious in the house. Drugs are widely suspected of being involved in Mainwaring's death, but the next day, Cousins passed a drug test.
Chris took him under his wing very early in the piece of, you know, basically from the moment they met, and he really had a strong bond with Ben straight away. And I think, as I said, he saw a lot of himself in Ben.
We were great mates. He probably played a bit of he did play a mentoring role with me, and losing him at the end of 2007, that's real loss, real disappointment, real grief.
I was with Ben the night before Chris Mainwaring died, and he was clean and sober that night, and he'd been back at meetings and he was doing all right.
Unfortunately, Ben was the last person to be with Chris, so regardless, there was going to be a lot said and a lot made up, and there was.
I've had to tolerate a lot of innuendo and criticism about the night that I spent with Mainie prior to him passing. And it's a cross that I've had to bear. I'm very thankful that I got to spend that time with him, and I'm thankful that I didn't use drugs with him and that I was there for him as a mate in some small way to return some of the favours that he did for me, because, he was in my corner right through all my troubles. And I have my own opinion on what happened after I left, and I left him in a good state. I had no immediate concerns for his well-being, and I think it was a tragic accident.
They were together at some point that day, the day of Chris Mainwaring's death, and then you see the shots of Ben at the funeral looking absolutely devastated, and that seems to have sparked another binge.
Ben Cousins shirtless and in the custody of police. His car was stopped in Northbridge just after lunch. The outturned pockets evidence that he'd been searched.
Officers found a variety of drugs in the vehicle and a $20 note with traces of cocaine on it.
I was 3-4 days into a relapse, and they decided to pull me over with the gang task force. When I got pulled over, I'm sure they thought there was a bootload of gear or a dead body. Cars and coppers come from everywhere.
Cousins was taken to traffic headquarters in East Perth. That's where his father Brian turned up, walking into the building.
You don't get pulled over by the gang task force without having huge surveillance and that, or and finding yourself in the middle of something. But charges wouldn't stick. What charges? I didn't have any drugs on me. I had Valium and some other prescription drugs that I had a script for.
If my information is correct, Ben was arrested and pulled over, and there was a camera already on the other side of the road filming the arrest. Now, you as a viewer work it out. If that happened and it is right, then clearly that media organisation was tipped off by the police.
Northbridge was payback for things that had happened in the past. I'd been made aware by certain people that something was going to happen eventually. Now, it reads like a setup, doesn't it?
If he were set up, I think it was when people in authority were sort of saying, we've had enough of this, we've got to bring this to a head. I mean, because they would have been, the police were aware of it years ago. The police knew all about Ben's dodgy friends and Ben's drug activities.
Yeah, the Northbridge moment was really one of the saddest moments I've ever seen. I think there and then it was in the face of everybody that this kid was just reeling out of control, that the game was being compromised incredibly badly, and Ben hadn't been found guilty, and yet clearly he was a runaway train.
At the beginning, the AFL was very intent on being seen as the father figure for all troubled footballers. And the AFL was seen to be really sensitive and fuzzy on this issue. Then when the problem didn't resolve itself, and then when Ben gets arrested in the middle of Perth, the AFL just simply said, we've got to cut this bloke. We've got this reputation, we've got a 3-strike policy on drugs, and here's a bloke who hasn't tested positive once, absolutely killing our image. And when you kill the AFL image, they kill you.
Today marked the first day of Cousins' banishment following last night's painful meeting of the West Coast Board.
The decision that the board took and the Eagles have taken is one which was due to an accumulation of events.
I was sacked by the footy club pretty much 24 hours later, and at that point, no one from the footy club had spoken to me or laid eyes on me.
Ben Cousins said goodbye to his mother and his sister before walking alone into Perth Airport, where he boarded a flight to Los Angeles to continue the drug rehabilitation program he started in April.
My life had become a soap opera. It was crazy. And the second time I went to LA was not to go to rehab, but more to just get out of the country for a holiday. Catch up with a few people that I'd met from the first time. It was funny because I hopped off the plane into this media scrum, and I'm looking for this driver that I know, and I'm looking over, I can't see him, and I'm starting to panic a bit. And this blonde female comes up, and she has a bit of paper, and she goes, "Oh, you're with me." The female driver then hops out, so then there's two blondes. I'm thinking, what's going on here? This is out of control. So I think they go to pick up my suitcase and put that in the back. I said, "Girls," I said, "there's enough people think I'm no good. At least let me put my luggage in the back of the car." I said, "All these people are getting footage of it." I said, "I don't need you two to make me look even worse."
Today, with reports swirling the country that Ben Cousins was missing in the United States, his father wanted to set the record straight.
Ben is not missing and has not been missing at any time whilst in the US. I and my family have spoken to him regularly. I spoke to him myself late last night. The ill-informed comments and the harassment by the media and others will not assist his rehabilitation. Thank you.
Susie and Nina. They were good times. Till I found myself in the back of an ambulance.
On the night of October 31, a panicked woman phoned 911 saying Cousins was in her Los Angeles apartment. She told the operator her guest had been on cocaine for the past 5 days. He's not being violent, he's just scared.
What type of drugs is that? Cocaine. Okay, how old is he? 20 million. Okay, and is he having, did he overdose?
It was serious. I woke up with IV drips and a catheter and...
Have you been on cocaine for 5 days?
At midnight, I had to hop on a plane and fly to America. He, in actual fact, was, I think, actually as frightened as he's been in his life, because here he was in a hospital. He'd been sedated. He woke up. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who was dealing with him. And I
spent probably 36 hours in hospital without a phone call, without speaking to anyone, without knowing whether anyone knew I was there.
And he never ever has said this to me, but I mentioned my brother-in-law was there. And a day or so later, he told my brother-in-law that when he knew I was there. He just burst into tears.
When the 9/11 call happens from America, it was like, I can't believe this is happening. I guess you sit there at times thinking, I'll get him out of this, I'll get him right, I'll help get him right, we'll all work together, this will be okay. I'm always a very positive person, and at times went home and thought, oh my God, he's going to die. He's going to die, and have I done enough? Has Brian done enough? Has his family done enough? Have we let him down? Have we, should we have let him go to America?
On November 19th, 2007, in the aftermath of Northbridge and the 911 call, I was banned by the AFL from playing football for 12 months.
Commissioners of the opinion that Mr Cousins has been involved in conduct which was unbecoming and was likely to prejudice the reputation and interests of the AFL and bring the game of football into disrepute.
This had never happened to any other player in AFL history.
Did Ben become a sacrificial lamb? Maybe to a degree, but did the AFL need to be really very, very strong on making sure that everyone within the game knew and understood the rules that the AFL were going to play by?
But I don't think they had any choice at the time. Ben had agreed to a set of conditions about returning to the game. He didn't fulfil those conditions, and I think they really had no choice.
I mean, I'm not ashamed of Ben and I'm not embarrassed about what happened, but my regret is that as a parent of 4 children, I knew absolutely nothing about drugs. I knew none of the warning signs to look for.
All these people without a job, I'm one of them. I left to my own devices. My idea of a holiday is what's got me into this predicament.
3-day benders, parties.
I said the only problem is, Ben, the only person who's not on this team is you.
So I just snatched it. Whether I gave it back to him or not, it wasn't gonna change anything.
If he saw it breaking me down, I just believed that it would be one of the things that turned him around.
My life would have been made a lot easier if I just told a lie. If I said my drug problem wasn't nearly as bad as it was.
I think his own honesty came back to bite him in the bum, actually.
I felt they were out to get me. This urine sample here would sell for a lot of money on the streets. Those people do not care about whether they find me hanging from a beam. I was hell-bent on showing up to the hair test with hair that was going to be negative. I can't even have people knowing I've got a shaved head.
You're being tested?
Yeah.
You've got no hair.
I'm cooked.
That was the only time that he faced reality in probably 20 years.
With unprecedented access.
Hello, mate.
Such is life. A major 7 exclusive.
The extraordinary conclusion tomorrow.